Hello, welcome to the Jay Show. This is Dr. Jay Smith, and I'm with a good friend of mine for many years, about 13 years we've known each other. Alan Craig, you have been a hero to many people. You have gone forward and had done battle like David and Goliath with the Tablighi Jamaat, one of the largest Muslim radical groups in the world, probably the largest radical group with a membership of 80 million, one man, and shut down this Olympic mosque from 2006 for about 10 years. And you've also been very aware as a politician. You're with the UKIP party. You've been very aware of what's happening here in Britain. And especially you've been aware of what the Muslims are doing. You kind of were forced, kicking and screaming, into the Muslim world against your sensibilities. You didn't really plan it that way. It's just that Muslims were all around you. And because they're so politically engaged, aren't they? Muslims are.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Islam is a political religion, isn't it?
It encompasses every area of life.
Yeah, absolutely.
How you walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep is a religious act.
And therefore, from a political point of view and a social point of view, it has an impact, must have an impact.
It must have an impact.
And they know no division between state and church or state and mosque, do they? It's all part of the same, so yeah.
It's also a religion based on a book, this book right here, the Quran. And when you look at this book, we were talking about this in the last episode, what it does to women. It really demeans women. I know Muslims always tell me it ennobles. I would love to know where there's nobility in raping your wife, marital rape in chapter 2, verse 2-3. I would love to know how it ennobles you when it's in chapter 2:30. If you have divorced your wife out of negligence or just out of stupidity, or maybe you're just tired, she has to go down to the mosque after you said the 3 times, talak, 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 3 times. She has to go down to a mosque and then be impregnated by the imam and pay 1,200 pounds to 1,500 pounds on top of that to get back in relationship with you. That's what the Quran says in chapter 2, verse 230, known as halal marriages. This kind of almost demeaning sexually of women is something we talked about in the last episode. And it was fascinating when you brought these up. You talked about almost an equally horrific response to this by the British police and the British council and the politicians.
Yeah, we have a very powerful concept in the UK political concept known as Islamophobia. And it in effect gives Islam protection from criticism. The particular thing I was talking about last time, which was about the rape gangs, the grooming gangs, hasn't been raised because the authorities didn't want to be seen to be Islamophobic, or next door word is racist. And that's what is thrown at anybody who raises that particular issue. But it was absolutely true, the same we talked in a previous episode about my campaign against the mega mosque. Again, I was accused of being Islamophobic, and it was a huge insult, a huge trying to shut you up.
Unpack that word, Islamophobia. Phobia means fear of Islam.
Yeah, but I think we need to know it isn't technically what it may mean technically, it's what it does politically that's important. And what's happening at the moment, I mean, it's really, really huge in the country at the moment, because attempts are being made to define Islamophobia. And it started off at a senior level. It started off in Parliament when something called an all-party parliamentary group started on Islamophobia, started to define the word. And they've just relatively recently, back at the end of last year, they came out with a definition. Perhaps I can just read it to you if that's okay.
Please do, yeah.
Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness.
Oh dear.
I have never heard the words Muslimness or perceived Muslim before. It's completely new. But what we're seeing here, what they're trying to do, if you like, formally and officially, is what we have known has been done for a long time, is trying to say that to criticize Islam or to criticize Muslims is racism.
Which is rather odd, because how would you define racism? Racism is by race. Islam's not a race.
Exactly, and many Muslims will say that to you. It's certainly, they're proud it's not a race. You know, we come from all around the globe. That's their big claim. But that doesn't help the politicians of this country who are determined to put a wall of protection around Islam and say this particular ethnic minority, this particular grouping here has special protections, and that's what this particular group is trying to do. So they're trying to say to criticize Islam is a form of racism, cultural racism. So if you criticize Muhammad or if you criticize the Quran, that becomes a form of racism.
Which is what my job is. I'm a polemicist. I'm an Islamic polemicist. That is what my PhD is on. I would no longer be able to stay or do anything in Britain. I could not even go down. What would you do with Speaker's Corner? You'd have to shut down Speaker's Corner. What would all the comics do? I mean, much of the comics, their material is criticism of the other, primarily Christians and Muslims.
Well, let me take you on from this. This report came out last year by this all-party parliamentary group. And immediately some councils and some authorities took it on as the definition, worryingly, including my own in East London. Newham Council took it on as their definition of Islamophobia. But the government didn't. The government rejected it and said, no, it's too vague. So some authorities...
Too vague so that it can be abused.
So it can be abused. And there is now something called a Home Affairs Select Committee in Parliament that is itself looking into it. And this is where the debate is going on. And they are looking, and they haven't yet come up with a definition of Islamophobia. But
Am
the
I
drift,
correct that the man who's leading that is a Muslim himself?
Sorry?
The man who's leading that is a Muslim himself?
No, I think the chair of it is Yvette Cooper, I think. She's a
okay, I was reading something else here. I was looking at this article that Chris Concern came out with, and they were saying, I'll come back to it. Go ahead and keep going.
Okay, but we're grateful that the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group, definition, which isn't formal, it's a group of MPs that get together and put it out there, but has been accepted by some authorities, including my own in East London, so they've have taken it. But the government has said, no, we're not going to accept that one. They're going to produce their own one via something called the Home Affairs Select Committee, and they're looking at it at the moment. However, people are so concerned about it that they have been campaigning. Suddenly you find Christians and humanists and secularists and comedians and historians and theologians are busy, and Richard Dawkins, the great atheist, are all coming together to say this definition must not be allowed to go for precisely the reasons you're saying.
Let me just give you some names of people who have now been who are considered to be homophobic. Theresa May.
Islamophobic.
Did I say homophobic? Yeah. Islamophobic. Yeah. Forgive me. We were talking about homophobia with the LGBT episode. This is Islamophobic. Listen to these names here. I mean, these are well-known names. Theresa May, number one. Tony Blair is Islamophobic. I had no idea. Amanda Spielman, Sarah Champion, Majid Nawat. Wait a minute. Majid Nawat is a Muslim himself. Yeah. Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, is considered to be Islamophobic because he has said things that were against Muslims. So this is going to catch everybody, not just you and me. This is going to catch well-standing, well-known people. These are the prime ministers of our country are going to be in hot if they continue to say what they say.
If we go down this route, it's a complete disaster for free speech, but also many other ways. A lot of the security authorities are really concerned about it because actually they feel that some of the major planks of the government dealing with terrorism will actually be undermined because if they start investigating Muslims or Islamists or whatever, they'll be held. This is
just use the Islamophobia.
It's illegal. It's illegal to do so.
I mean, you can see you would have to shut down almost any arrest. You would have to shut. I mean, and it would give free rein to every Muslim to pretty much do what they want.
Absolutely.
And this would pretty much say, then listen, why do we even have to worry about recourse? We just use the Islamophobic ban, and that will get us off the hook every time. Almost like what we were talking in the last episode with the grooming gangs, when they saw that there was no recourse, when they saw that they could pretty well take these girls at their leisure, at their pleasure. Sorry for the pun, but can you see the difficulty with that? That's why it became so rampant. When you're saying as many as 250,000, maybe as many as a million. Girls were then caught in those grooming gangs. The same thing could happen here, right across the board on every count.
We think we're just discussing words. We aren't. We're discussing far more than that. We're discussing people's lives and so on and so forth. We're discussing state security against terrorism. We're discussing all sorts of things. It is absolutely key. And it's part of the wider thing of the closing down of free speech. You and I would think, wouldn't you? You'd think, well, you would agree you shouldn't. Hatred against Muslims is wrong. Hatred against any people group is wrong. Okay, just because they're a part of that people group.
But where does that come from?
But sorry,
this idea of hatred against people, where does that come from?
Well, it comes from loving the sinner and hating the sin, isn't it? That's what we make.
It comes from Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. We must love our enemy. That is really a Christian ideal. If you get rid of Christ, if you get rid of that Christian ideal, if you get rid of the gospel, then you come back to really, what else do you have? Where were this idea of loving the other?
Well, I mean, because we're effectively over here a post-Christian society, all the Christian values that have sustained our civilization and made us a civilization are being drained out of our culture. So we don't have the protection. We don't have protection around free speech and so on. And this sort of thing, it all becomes all about power and about takeover and control and so on. It's not about service and truth and all those sort of things. So it's deeply disturbing that is the direction of travel. We can be grateful that the government refused to accept this particular definition, although some authorities at a lower level have, but the government at the top level refused. But that's the direction of travel, and there's some really serious names who are up against it for obvious reasons. And
let me just read this this definition that the Casey Review says, and this is their definition. This is their problem with that definition. Too many public institutions, they say, national and local, state and non-state, have gone so far to accommodate diversity and freedom of expression that they have ignored or even condoned regressive, divisive, and harmful cultural and religious practices for fear of being branded racist or Islamophobic. At its most serious, it might mean public sector leaders ignoring harm or denying abuse, which is what you're getting at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that's what you're getting at. Yeah. And it's almost a phobia of Islamophobia. So it's Islamophobia. Yeah. Now we're going to have to create a whole new word here to try to define what we're...
I think somebody have already come up with that. They've already come up with
it's right here in this report that's put out by
that's
Christian Concern.
Right. Yeah.
They coined that term. And I would suggest that that's really at the root of it. We are so fearful of being called these things. We're so fearful of being called racist. They know that, so that's why they're trying to bring racism as a category that it includes Islamophobia.
It's part of the closing down of freedom of speech. If you can stick this word on it, it's the same as homophobia. I remember when I was campaigning against gay marriage in favour of traditional marriage, okay? Yeah. You're shut out of the conversation because you're accused of being homophobic, and nobody wants to be homophobic, so you're just pushed out of the conversation. You're no longer mainstream. Same with this, except they're broadening it. It's so broad, the whole idea of what is encompassed by the word Islamophobic. And what it means is, you're absolutely right, you will not be able to do your job. You can criticize Christianity, you can criticize Hinduism, you can criticize communism, you can criticize any other ideology or any other body of thought you can criticize, right, but not Islam. It's a privileging of Islam in our society. They have a privilege that nobody else has. That's what's happening.
Here's the National Secular Society. Look at this. They're agreeing with you on this. Isn't that fascinating? Yeah. We now are finding strange bedfellows who are coming alongside us. This is what they say. Islamophobia confuses hatred of and discrimination against Muslims with criticism of Islam, which is exactly what you're saying. Yeah. We want to criticize Islam. We don't want to criticize Muslims. They're putting the two in the same and saying every time you criticize Islam, every time I criticize the Quran or Muhammad, the figure of Islam, or even the God of Islam, I'm criticizing Muslims. Yeah. Therefore, that's racial because Muslims are a people. There's racist. We already know you can't be racist. Therefore, you get the same punishment. And that shuts down any debate. That shuts down any discussion. That shuts down lots of industries, especially comedians. I can see this is going to destroy the whole comedy circuit, to say nothing of the fact that what are politicians going to do? How are police going to police? How are our security services going to keep us secure from the Islamic threat, which is a very real threat? It's happening all over the world, if they cannot even be critical of what they're investigating for fear of Islamophobia.
Yeah, that's right, absolutely.
The ramifications just go on and on.
Yeah, they do, and it's all part of a sort of, it's allowing a salami slice by salami slice Islamification of our society. Once that alone, of all the competing faiths and ideologies around, has a privileged position that you cannot criticize it, because if you do, you'll be racist. Once that happens, all becomes lost. All becomes lost. And that's why you're quite right. There's a coalition of people, Christians, non-Christians, Hindus, the whole lot. There's some big names. I mean, I see that Tom Holland is a great classicist and well-known Tom. I think he's known to you as well.
Yeah, we've been friends and we've worked together. You're right.
Yeah, well, he's been part of this whole movement. He's already been, because some of the work he's done and some of the TV series he's done, and you know more about that than I do, he's already been accused of being Islamophobic. He said, it'll shut down all my research because there is no doubt whatsoever, as he says, that in the past that Islam has been based on violence and the sword. And if I put that out there as a historical fact,
the name of his book is In the Shadow of the Sword.
That's right. I'll be accused of Islamophobia, and I'll be locked up for being a racist.
This is particularly people like you and me as well. Now, what's fascinating, in some ways, we almost expect this. This is not a surprise for you and me. We have been called Islamophobic. I was in Hong Kong last November. I was going to do a debate with a well-known Muslim on these Quranic variants, which is as academic as you can get. There's nothing to do with Muslims in this debate. It all had to do with this book. And when the Muslims found out that I was going to do it, when the debater found out that I was going to do it on the variants, the continental variants, he refused to show up. So we went ahead and planned to do it at the City University, which is the one place you should have an exchange of ideas. I would think the university, the second largest university in Hong Kong, the day before the lecture, the Muslims went to the office of the bursar. They were not students. They didn't belong to the university. They walked in. They were Pakistanis, interestingly. They're not even Chinese. And they said, if you allow Jay Smith to come and do this lecture would not be allowed in any other country. Even in his own country, he was not allowed to do this lecture. No one investigated that claim. They said, because of this, he's an Islamophobe. He is a hate preacher. They didn't talk to me. They didn't ask what I was going to speak on. I never got a phone call. I never even got asked to see what my notes were, what the subject was about. I was banned. Immediately banned, just like that. Now, we went and we said, it's unfortunate you've banned me. What are you going to do it? Anyways, church right next door, a Lutheran church, they didn't even know who I was. They welcomed me to have the meeting. The place was packed out. We filmed it. And we put it up on YouTube. We just put it up on YouTube about a month and a half ago. It's 42,000 people have watched it. You cannot shut down debate. We know this as Christians. You cannot shut down the truth. We know this as Christians. We know as Christians that we should expect this. I mean, Matthew 10 is very clear. Jesus sending out the 12 disciples. You're going to be hated for my name. You're going to be persecuted for my name. You're going to be jailed for my name. You're going to be flogged for my name. You're going to be killed. He should put one more there. You're going to be banned for my name as well. And I think in some ways this is this is all to be expected, because Christian leaders have had these 5 things applied to them for the last 2,000 years. But for those who don't have this kind of history, or if they have had this kind of history, they can remember it. This is going to cause shudders right through society. It's going to cause shudders in the educational field. It's going to cause shudders in the security field, in the political sphere. I can't think of any other place that this is not going to touch, because when you don't have freedom of speech, then you shut down almost that's the basis for any interaction, secular and non, but it's also the basis of what our relationship between each other is all about.
Sure, no, and it isn't, you're right about for Christians, but this is hitting non-Christians just as much, and they can see it just as much. And the way the sort of establishment is busy promoting this, and the political class is busy promoting this, wherever the direction of travel stops, if indeed it stops, it is deeply dangerous for us to be able to have a free exchange of ideas and working out what is the truth. That's, a democracy like ours is built on the basis you put forward ideas, I put forward ideas, and we test them backwards and forwards and argue about them and so on, and somehow we get some bit nearer to the truth. But now we're a post-truth society. We don't mind what the truth is. It's all now about power and emotion and politics, and that's what's happening here.
Here are some examples of Islamophobia that they've put out in the report that you sent to me. Accusing Muslim citizens of being more loyal to the Ummah, transnational Muslim community, which means the Muslims back home from Pakistan or Bangladesh or India, or to their countries of origin, just that, or to the alleged priorities of Muslims worldwide, then to the interests of their own nations would be Islamophobic. You can't use that anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
So which cricket team do you support?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
That will become Islamophobic.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's fascinating, because does this word exist for Christians? Do we have a Christianophobia? Do we have Hinduophobia? Is there any other religion that has a phobia attached to its name?
No. It's the privileging of Islam alone. Islam alone has it. And this word is a very powerful word for shutting down any discussion about Islam. That's, of course, what they want to do. Is Muslim authorities do not consider Islam needs to be debated. It just needs to be obeyed, or Allah needs to be obeyed. And therefore, what do you want to discuss it for?
Well, fortunately, according to Lord Bourne of Aberystwyth, said this: the government do not currently endorse a particular definition of Islamophobia yet, Previous attempts by others to define this term have not succeeded in attracting consensus or widespread acceptance. So there seems to be a logjam at the moment, a stoppage, because it is not definable. And that may be the silver lining in this whole discussion.
It may be, but we need to know. I mean, the direction of travel is all one way at the moment, okay? And the all-party parliamentary group, with their funny definition about Muslimness and so on and so forth, that has certain traction in parts of society and has been accepted by certain authorities. I think one or two police authorities have accepted it, certain of my own local authorities accept it, and so on. But now the government is saying we don't accept it, and therefore it's not the final legal definition, but we're looking for one at the moment. Now it'd be great if they turn around and say, actually we decided we're not going to define it, we don't think it's a valid political concept. Or even better if they said, we don't mind criticism of Islam, what we object to is criticism, unacceptable criticism of Muslims, hate speech about Muslims. They said that, we'd be free to discuss the Quran and Islam and so on. But I think that's unlikely.
The Sikhs have brought this forward. They have this, they've submitted this to the Home Affairs Society. They said, we are of the view that anti-Muslim hatred, like anti-Sikh or anti-Hindu, is much clearer language to describe hate crimes, specifically against Muslim community, which then would open up the possibility, as long as you're not criticizing, and I would want to put the Christian too. Why is there not an anti-Christian there? Why is it that the only Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs are listed there? I would like to say anti-Christians as well, because we're in the same category.
I think maybe we'll come on to this in another session. We'll talk about the role of Christianity in our society today, or at least the declining role of Christianity in our society today, and the growing hostility towards Christianity in our
I think
society
that's
today.
it. And I think there's too few people like you here in Britain. That's probably the bigger problem, because we're certainly a lot more numerous than there are Sikhs or Hindus. And certainly we do hold a bigger sway as far as our history, and we certainly do still have a larger impact on the fabric of this country than do the Sikhs and the Hindus. Yet I'm fascinated, even the Sikhs who have put this out there have not bothered to put Christians in there, or you might even say others of other faith, like Buddhists. Is fascinating. So I would understand that, and I would think it'd be much more healthy from what they're expecting. Let's say, no, don't have any anti-Muslim, anti-Sikh, anti-Hindu, anti-Christian, anti-Buddhist. Fine. But for heaven's sakes, don't stop the criticism of the religion itself or of the book itself.
You speak complete sanity, Jay, but sanity is not where our political life is at the moment, and probably hasn't been for a long time. I think I've heard others. I've heard Muslim. We mentioned earlier about Majid Nawaz. He himself has argued publicly. He said we must separate between Islamophobia and Islamophobia. And Islamophobia, the criticism of Islam, is fine. Muslimophobia, hatred of Muslims because they're Muslim, is not. And he's put that out there as a Muslim. But you can imagine when you start saying that, the opposition from left-wing liberal sources and from Muslim authorities themselves is huge, because it's to all their benefit to close down the discussion if Islamophobia can be this all-encompassing expression that includes Muslims, the religion, Muhammad, and so on. None of that can be criticised. They can do what they like. It's put in protective walls, so they do what they want. It's new blasphemy laws.
It is.
We got rid of our blasphemy laws, but it's new blasphemy laws.
And that came up, I remember back in 2006 when they tried to bring that through Parliament, and that one lost by just one vote. That's here in Britain. But let me ask you this. One of the things we have on our the tagline on our website, and also in Fander, is love the Muslim, confront Islam. Love the Muslim, confront Islam. Now, we put that there, we've had that for years. Please, for heaven's sakes, don't confront the Muslim. And we say that every time I teach. I say, please love the Muslim. They're the most beautiful people. They're the best people to love. I find them so attractive because they're so passionate, and I love that passion. Why would you want to love them? But it's what the book does, this book does to them, what it does to women, what it does to men. Therefore, confront this book, but don't confront the Muslim. Now, if that were the case, and I was thinking, if we Geert Wilders, remember him, the politician who put out that film Fitna? He was taken to court because of that that film. It's just a 15-minute film. You can go up online and see it. And at his court case, at his hearing, he brought up cleric after cleric to go and unpack these verses. There was only 5 verses that he was pointing to. chapter 4, verse 89, chapter 8, verse 60. There are these 5 verses, chapter 47, verse 4, which are there in the Quran for you to read. And what he did was very clever. He said, listen, you're confronting me as a hate preacher, as an Islamophobe, but let's see if this is, because I'm just going to quote these verses that I put in the film, and then I'm going to have Claire exegete these verses for you to see if I exegeted them correctly. Within a week, the entire court case became against the Quran. He had taken the anger against him, and the belief was he was going to be taken to court, and he was going to be jailed, or he would have to be penalized on a movie that was Islamophobic, they thought, but it became a court case against the Quran. Within a week, the Muslim leaders realized what was happening. All that they were discussing was verses out of the Quran that they didn't want to be discussed in public view, and they finally had to throw the case out. So they finally shut down the case, and he was never penalized. In some ways, if we remember to do that as Christians, those of us who are working with Muslims, if we remember not to confront the Muslim, to forget about don't even bring them into it, if we stick to the book and the man being Muhammad, and stick to those areas of discussion, those areas of criticism, if they do take us to court, then we just say, well, let's see, what is it we're here for? What verses did you like me to speak about? Can we unpack those verses? You've done 2 things. You've brought back the problem again, and the whole case, or everything, even if you are brought in front of not a court of law, maybe even a court of opinion, maybe you're brought on TV, the whole case then surrounds where the battle should be. The battle should not be with Muslims. The battle should be this book. The battle should be the man himself, sure. Muhammad.
But that's a very good and clear distinction, Jay, and it's relatively easy for yourself. But you also have to recognize that what do you do about the Muslims that behave according to the tenets of that book, because their behavior will be antisocial from a Western point of view. And I think that's the issue. Like you, I like Muslims. I have no problem with Muslims. I live amongst Muslims. I like Muslims. Mostly I find they're polite and pleasant and considerate and have high moral standards. But there are those that the closer they follow the Quran, the more acceptable their behavior becomes.
Then why don't you say that publicly? And by saying that publicly, if you're ever taken to court, say, well, let's just read. What am I saying? Remember what I said. Repeat what I said. It's the book that's the problem. Don't blame the guys. Don't blame,
sure,
blame the book.
But we've got a well-known problem, haven't we? Let's take Germany, for instance. Angela Merkel, in back 2015, invited 1 million refugees coming into the country. Overwhelmingly, they were Muslim, and overwhelmingly they were young males, okay? And they have caused huge social problems. Now, how can you just discuss it?
Okay, I want you right now, we only have a minute left. Okay, I want you to give a solution. Tell me. I've given my solution. I want to see what your solution is. Help us. At the end of this now, we have 1 minute to go. What can the people who are watching you, how can we solve this problem? How can the Alan Craigs of the world solve this problem?
The particular problem we're talking about, the definition of Islamophobia, which is not to do with the problem in Germany particularly, but the particular problem of defining Islamophobia, we need to get onto our politicians, onto our MPs and say this is coming around the corner. This sort of a definition that we've been talking about here is simply not accepted. We need to write to we have the right to our MP. They'll all be involved in this in due course. They need to be aware of what's going on and quote other names. I mean, there's star names like Tom Holland, like Richard Dawkins, like the National Secular Society, and Christian authorities and Muslim Hindu authorities, and actually 1 or 2 Muslims as well. Courageous Muslims themselves have said this is not acceptable.
Well, Majid Nawaz, he's a friend of mine. Yeah. We've worked together. We were both on BBC together. Quote his name, because he has said this over and over again, and he's taken the mick from the Muslim community. And God bless him for hanging in there. Yeah. So let's do that. Let's just go public. And I think this is hard for Christians. I know for those of you who are watching this show, it's difficult for you. Possibly don't have a country that can do that. If we would be as public as they are public, if we go and actually say that this is not to be done, we need to have the freedom of speech to do so. Stand up. Hold your ground. Jesus did it. Paul did it. You can do it. God bless you. This is Jay here in London with my good friend Alan Craig. Over and out.